This is Jen Sugermeyer with Recovery Today magazine, bringing you stories of strength and hope. And today we are joined, I am so excited for this interview with the incredible Johnny Crowder, who I happened to see just a tiny little clip on the news one time. And now he's here with us today. Johnny, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm digging your background also. Very peaceful.
Thank you. So I am not a big fan of the news, but I'm a big fan of heavy metal music. And I think that's what intrigued me. I was going down one of those Facebook rabbit holes or YouTube or whatever it was, and they keep having suggestions. And I saw this, heavy metal news clip, and not something that normally would catch my attention if it was just a news clip, but I was intrigued by just the heavy metal part. And it said, talked about mental health. And I said, oh, that was enough to pique my interest. I think it was an ABC that came out back in July, maybe of 2021. And I listened to it, I watched it, and I started doing some research on this band Prison, whom you are the lead singer of. And I was so intrigued on so many levels and learning about your story some. And so I'm so excited for you to be here today to share some of that with us, because you have such a powerful message and you are capturing attention, I would say globally at this point. And we'll dig further into that. So I'm not going to give all of the introduction to you other than you are the lead singer of Prison, which is an incredible heavy metal band. You are the CEO of CopeNotes. You've been on the news. You were recently in Forbes. You've done a TED Talk. There's so many things that we could just go down of all your accomplishments. It's absolutely incredible. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your story and where this all began for you? Because I know 10 years ago to where you are now, two totally different points in your life. So why don't you take us back, take our recovery community back to where your story begins?
Yeah, I'm always, whenever people list things that I've done in a row, I'm like confused because my whole life I spent thinking that I would not only never be healthier, but also never participate in something like this. I had, when I was a kid, if you would have told me that I would one day be healthy, I would not believe you. And then if you were to tell me that I would be helping other people deal with what I was dealing with, I would think you were lying to me. I would never believe it. I grew up in an abusive environment, which I think is where a lot of my mental and emotional health concerns came from, or at least some of them. And I really, it's not like the typical, when someone got into their teenage years, they started being moody and their parents thought it was a phase. This was like, before I started elementary school, I was self-harming. So it's very, very, very young age to start experiencing any of this stuff. I was hallucinating and having a difficult time communicating with people. And really, mental illness has affected pretty much my entire life. So that's why when you're saying like, oh, TED Talk and Forbes and stuff, I'm just like, what the heck? Because there's still a part of me that is shocked that I'm even able to participate in this industry, because I never even wanted to go to treatment,
And here you are. So as a child, lots of things that you were dealing with. Where did music come into play with all of that? Where did you find music in your story?
I was kind of left without a lot of, I'll say this, I didn't have a lot of coping mechanisms.
Okay.
I didn't fit in super well at school. I didn't fit in very well with my family at all. And I didn't like the normal, quote unquote, normal stuff that you're supposed to like football, there was a lot of stuff that I think I just didn't click with me. And music, for whatever reason, since I was a kid, like since I was in elementary school, music has always been a language that I've understood. And when I was 7 years old, literally, I would I would lay on my stomach with my head in my hands like this. staring at my radio. I had an FM radio, and I would listen to whoever was on the radio, which at the time was like 3 Days Grace and Seether and Breaking Benjamin and stuff like that radio rock era, System of a Down, Linkin Park. And I would sit in my room staring at my radio thinking like, this hunk of plastic is the only thing that understands me. Like, I actually, even on my knuckles, I have the I don't know if you're watching the video version, you can see I have the buttons of a cassette player tattooed on my fingers. So like play, record, fast forward,
That's
skip
awesome.
track, stop.
That's going to be
So-
antique here soon, by the way.
Yep. I had a cassette player, and when I was young, I didn't really discriminate with the style of music that I listened to. As I got older, I developed more of a taste, but when I was younger, you could put on the Barney theme song and I would just be jamming. Or my mom had the soundtrack to Beverly Hills Ninja, and I would just listen to that on the cassette player. Like pretty much whatever music I could find, even drumming on the couch, just brought me such tremendous peace, and it really just made me feel understood.
Yeah. Were your parents, do you come from a musical family?
No, we I will say that my dad had a couple guitars on the wall, but he didn't play. I think they
Okay.
were more like gifts, or he played when he was younger or something. But my little and older brothers were kind of like all American guys, and then I was like writing poetry and playing guitar and stuff. So I kind of stuck out a little bit.
So, and I was going to ask about poetry because I would imagine that they go hand in hand. So, as you're a kid, you're listening to your FM radio. I mean, you're writing music and starting to sing along or kind of craft songs in your head with the words that you're writing. How did that look? What did that look like?
I was writing music all the time, and it was probably, if I were to play any of it for you, I would have had to record it, obviously, and I was a kid, so I couldn't. But I would try to like record stuff on a cassette tape, and it was so bad and so juvenile. But 20 something years later, I think that is what has equipped me as a songwriter, like why the songs that I write today I'm proud of, and I think that they're good. It takes a lot for me to say that. Like, you come from low self-worth, low self-esteem, being hypercritical, to get to the point where you can say that I'm proud of the music I write. I think it's good. It's just a product of writing music for like literally decades. If I would have stopped because I was bad, I wouldn't have a music career, because I was pretty bad.
Well, I mean, in all fairness, you start out pretty young, but that's really powerful to, being so young and having an outlet. I think that says a lot. I think there's a lot of kids that don't know any outlet or where to go. And you found that writing and singing and connecting to something, you were able to, did it help you work through your, what was happening?
It was the only way I could process stuff, because you couldn't pay me to say like, I am being abused. Like I wouldn't be able to say that, because I didn't understand it that way. I more understood like, I'm frustrated and I feel hurt and I feel trapped and stuck, and being able to verbalize this in a conversation was virtually impossible for me. But being able to write a song about feeling stuck, or writing a song about wanting to feel safe, just, it almost like provided a medium with a little less resistance. Like, socially, it was difficult for me to say those things out loud, but if I could write them and play guitar to it and kind of dress it up differently, it was a way for my brain to lower its guard enough to honestly honor whatever feeling it was, instead of trying to like, man up and stuff it down.
Yeah. Wow, that's powerful. Were you seeing anyone when you were a kid? Did your parents have you in any kind of therapy or seeing a school counselor or anyone?
Not until I had a particularly problematic conduct outburst that I won't get too far into, but I really just had really bad anger issues when I was growing up. And there was one unfortunate incident where I lost my temper to a degree that I had not experienced before. And it was kind of my mom's opportunity to say, either I can take you
Mm-hmm.
to treatment, or I can call the police and they can take you to treatment. And it was like kind of a no-brainer for me. I would rather have my mom drive me. So I started treatment when I was like 14 years old or something. But I had the worst attitude about it. I
Mm-hmm.
was probably the biggest problem client that any of my clinicians saw.
Mm. And maybe one of their biggest success stories too. So there's also that, so there's that. So where did things in your life, where did you start exploring with um, addiction? Where did that start to come into play in your life?
Well, a common misconception around, so I'm a big sobriety advocate,
Uh-huh.
and I do not drink, I do not smoke. I talk a lot, like I speak at conferences about sobriety. I speak a lot about the relationship between drugs and alcohol and mental health. In fact, my extended essay, my graduation requirement for the IB program that I was in high
Uh-huh.
school, I spent a year writing a paper about the effects of drugs and alcohol on your brain and
Mhm.
mental health. So this is like has been a focus of my life and advocacy career for over a decade. And people are really surprised to find out that I have never used any substance ever.
Mm.
And it sometimes people go, "Oh, well, I don't want to listen to him because he hasn't experienced it." But I grew up in a home where I was surrounded by this stuff.
Mhm.
And then you start touring, right? So you're at metal shows every single night for months at a time, and all your band members and your bandmates are doing drugs and drinking every single night. So I was surrounded virtually since birth with drugs and alcohol. So for me, I knew when I was like 5 years old that I
Mhm.
never wanted to touch drugs or alcohol because I saw
Mm.
firsthand right in front of my 5-year-old eyeballs
Mm.
like what these things could do to people. And I'm very transparent about never having struggled with addiction with substances specifically, but psychologically, in my experience, OCD is very similar
Mhm.
to addiction. My personal lived experience with OCD related to the addiction that I have seen in my friends and family firsthand, I think there's a lot of crossover.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that when we hear the word addiction, we think drugs and alcohol, and it's
Hmm.
everything. In fact, I think if we really went there, I think everyone's addicted to something. It
Hmm.
could be people, it could be exercise, it could be sex, it could be coffee, it could be tea, it could be
Oh
whatever.
yeah.
I mean, addiction comes in anything. And so absolutely having a compulsive behavior, I, I'm not a PhD or anything, but
Mhm.
absolutely, I think that falls along the same lines. So okay, so that's interesting because I thought that had been a part of your story. So um but growing up around that and seeing the impacts, I think you bring a certain perspective that a lot of us don't, especially in Recovery Today magazine. A lot of us that maybe have been in recovery, we don't have that perspective. And so that's interesting that you're able to bring that into the fold. So
I also tell people like living with mental illness and being aware from such a young age that
mhm,
I knew that something was um askew mentally. I
mhm,
knew that if I engaged with any type of substance, that it could pretty much only harm
yeah,
whatever I was going through. It would exacerbate like the way that other people behaved, that my friends and family behaved when they were under the influence was very much like how I behaved when I wasn't under the influence of anything. It was just
right.
the effects of my mental illness. So I thought, how on earth could I use drugs or alcohol when I'm already behaving in many ways like I'm under the influence?
Yeah.
It was an effort to not pour fuel on the fire, so to speak.
Which is huge. That's huge. I mean, that's why a lot of us drink and drug is because we don't want to feel. There are these things
Hmm.
that are going on, these emotions, feelings, life, and it's how do we deal with these? Well, if we drink, then we feel more comfortable in our own skin, or we don't have to deal with our problems, or
Mm.
whatever that may be. And then, it takes over and manifests into maybe something larger that we never anticipated. And all of a sudden we're hooked. And the fact that you had that awareness is really powerful. Um, so you were getting treatment when you were a teenager, and this was something that you actively, it sounds like you wanted to work through. Can you talk about some of kind of
No,
what you were going on as a teenager?
I super didn't want to
Oh, you didn't
engage.
want to.
So my mom basically made me. And so I would show up and behave in such a way that I like kind of hoped to get kicked out of treatment. So I'd have to stop going because I mean, much like you just said, people will drink to kind of turn away from how they're feeling and not have to deal with it. That's what I was doing, but in all sorts of different ways. I was struggling with eating disorders at the time. So I thought if I can just make myself so hungry
Yeah.
that it hurts, then I can focus on how hungry I am rather than, what I'm actually going through. I was like, and that's how self-harm manifested my life. That's how I was finding different ways to run away. So as soon as I started treatment, my objective, like primary objective, was how do I get myself kicked out?
Mm,
How do I become such a difficult, frustrating client? How can I find a reason to disbelieve anything my clinician is saying or to discredit their expertise so that I don't have to listen to them? It was like
mm,
all defense mechanisms. And it, I jumped from clinician to clinician for a while before I found um, one person who was patient enough to put up with me week after week and kind of melt my heart a little bit because I needed the person to help me. Basically, what I would say is the moment I met a clinician, I would say, "Oh, do you have schizophrenia?" And they'd say no. And I go, "Oh, okay. Do you have bipolar one? No. PTSD? No. OCD? No." Then you don't get to help me because you don't know what I'm going through. And I used that to like guard myself for so long. But what's funny is the woman who I actually stuck with for the longest had none of those diagnoses. She just was the best listener.
hmm. Interesting. So, and it sounds like she was, you know, um, she kept showing up. She,
Yeah.
wasn't going to give up on you and just was able to listen. And interesting. So, of all the people, it was listening is what drew you in.
Well, I was trying to scare people, right? Like if I sit down with a new clinician, I think like, how do I make them not want to see me again
Yeah.
so that I don't have to see them anymore?
Yeah.
And I started throwing so much junk at her. I'm like, oh, I experienced this type of abuse. And then sometimes I dream about this. And then I'm so angry about this. And I'd raise my voice and get all frustrated. And she would just listen. And I was like, holy crap, I cannot phase this woman. And I think the way you phrased it was really good. It was that she kept showing up like every single week. It was like none of the rude or disruptive or scary things that I did or said the last week even applied. It was
Hmm.
like blank slate every week. And I'm like, this woman is unflappable. What am I supposed to do? And then I just started kind of opening up because I knew that I wouldn't scare her away.
How long do you think that process took?
Oh, probably definitely months. I was going once a week. And so it was probably like once we got to the double digit sessions where I'm like, wow, she's still willing to meet with me and be patient.
Yeah.
I would say it took at least 6 months before we started making any sort of real progress because even when I was going to see her, and I didn't want to leave, I still didn't believe in the process. Like I didn't
Mm,
believe that therapy would help me. I didn't believe that I could get better. And I didn't want to be a willing participant in my recovery because think about OCD, for example.
yeah.
I needed things to be a certain way for me to feel safe.
Mm,
So I couldn't step on cracks because I was nervous that something this is all, might as well describe it. I was convinced beyond all doubt that if I were to step on a crack, there would be a tiny blade in the crack that would cut my foot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that's just one of a trillion examples
Mm-hmm.
of ways that my um, schizophrenia and OCD were manifesting in my life at this time. And imagine a doctor coming to you and saying, Johnny, I'm going to help you step on cracks. I would go, no, I don't want to.
Mm.
It will hurt me if I do that. So it took months and months for me to intellectualize that it was actually better for me to get over the thing than to cling to the safety that I thought it would provide. It was a
Mm.
really tough mental hurdle for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what you said there was I think we can apply that statement to everything. Really, it's we have to be bigger than our problems, or we have to be willing to get over the thing and leave what's in the past, because we know that that's, put the other thing aside, because that's what's ultimately hurting us. But it's so hard to get over that hurdle.
I picture it in sobriety. Like I've had a lot of friends say, why would I stop drinking? It's like the only time that I feel any kind of relief from what I'm experiencing. Like you want to help me get rid of the coping mechanism that is the only thing providing me relief. And
Yeah.
it I completely understand how people are like, well, getting sober sounds like a terrible idea. It's the only time I can calm down, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're seeing this lady, and how long did you guys, was it a couple of years you stayed with her?
Yeah, for a few years. And then I went to college. So I moved to a different city and I had to start meeting with a couple of clinicians at my school. And I had to do, unfortunately, I had some more behavioral issues in college. So I had to start doing mandatory counseling in order to stay enrolled. So I was seeing a psychologist and a psychiatrist. And I was medicated from basically 14 on.
Mm.
So it was, I wish I could have stayed with her, but she was also a pediatric clinician. So once I turned 18, she's like, well, that's, you're like kind of in a different camp now.
Yeah.
So I kind of hopped around for a few years in college and after college too, like trying to find the right doctor.
So what was going on behind the scenes as you're now in college? Did you go away to college? Like, did you go to like stay in a dorm, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So I was that, honestly, it is a huge chat. You want to give someone with OCD a real challenge, put them in a dorm room with 3 other people who
Yeah.
don't have
Oh.
OCD. And it was like, so it was a huge challenge. I was only like 2.5 hours away. So I grew up in Tampa and I went to school in Orlando. So it was like two hours and change away from where I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
So it was close enough to drive to, but it felt like worlds away
Yeah.
because one way that my OCD manifested was I wanted things to be the same. I didn't want stuff
Sure.
to change.
Yeah.
So I established all of these things the way that I like them in Tampa, and then I move to Orlando and everything's all different. I have to relearn a ton of stuff. It was very jarring for
And
me.
3 roommates is a lot, and 3 male roommates, I can only imagine.
Yes, it was. I remember people cooking, like my roommates would cook pasta or something, eat out of the pot that they cooked the pasta in, and then put the whole pot in the refrigerator. Just
Yeah.
and then pull it out to heat it up and eat it, and then just leave it in the sink. And bro, I didn't even want to walk out of my bedroom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Going,
Sounds like my roommate. I just threw away dishes at some point. I was like, I'm not, what are we doing here? Like, this is
jeez,
so gross. I just throw stuff away. And I don't have OCD. So I can imagine, and 3 roommates is a lot. So,
yeah.
what else was going on in your life at the time? So you're going to school. I mean, are you still feeling a lot of the same things that you were feeling as a kid? Do you feel better equipped? What was Johnny like behind the scenes? Are you playing music?
So things got a lot worse. unfortunately. So leaving Tampa and going to Orlando, almost all my friends went to different schools. So I went from having a relatively reliable social circle to basically only having one or two people that I
Mm.
knew. And it turned into a lot of staying up all night and sleeping all day. I gained a lot of weight. I was taking antipsychotic medication at the time, and I gained a lot of it. Was not freshman 15 for me. I wish it was. It was like, I think I gained something like 30 or 40 pounds.
I gained 30 pounds.
Um,
Sounds like we have a similar freshman year. I
yeah,
gained 30.
it, it, it was, and I was, unfortunately, my schizophrenia was getting a lot worse. So
Mm,
in my late teens, early 20s is when my hallucinations were starting to become more severe and affect my behavior very dramatically. And at the time, yes, I was like playing concerts and I really wanted to be a full-time musician, but financially, I wasn't capable of making that commitment. And I had a full ride scholarship to the school I was in. So my parents were like, you better stay in school. So
mm,
it was like, I was miserable because of my diagnoses. I was miserable because none of my friends were anywhere nearby, and I was miserable because I wasn't able to do what I wanted to do with my life. Like from every single I look back and I genuinely don't know how I survived those years, like between 18 and probably
mm,
24 or so. That like 6-year period was, it was like constant unabated darkness in every category of my life, even though we were experiencing success. Like my band got signed when I was 19 or 20.
mhm,
So we started touring full time, and I'm miserable and hurting. And it just, we're achieving these like bucket list things, and I couldn't even enjoy them because I was so unhealthy.
mm.
I really wish, I shouldn't wish stuff like this, but I'll say this, it would be cool to go back and experience all that as a healthy person, because I feel like someone else achieved those things and didn't enjoy them, like it was literally someone else's life.
Mm. Now, so was your band in Tampa? Would
Mhm.
you like go from Orlando to Tampa and do your gigs there? Okay.
Yeah, but we were traveling a lot. So I would come to Tampa, and actually moved back to Tampa when we started touring full time.
Um,
So we would be out for, when we first started touring, we'd only be out for like 3 weeks at a time. But then as we, after we got signed and started touring full time, it was like 2.5 months out at a time, which, challenge number two for someone with OCD, put them on tour, living in a van and at metal venues every day. Everything was so disgusting.
That's an interesting college experience to be going to school full time, a full ride to school, which is incredible, and to be touring, um, and to be dealing with all of your mental health challenges. What did you do during that to help yourself stay as grounded as you could, dealing with all of these things and the moving pieces?
I I wish I could say something really smart and noble, but I wasn't grounded at all.
Mm,
And I wasn't really doing anything about it. I just wanted to, I wish I could say I just wanted to stay alive, but I didn't even really want that either. I was
mm,
just kind of like, I wasn't even really participating in my own life. Like my life was happening
mhm,
around me, and I would like tune in whenever I could, but most of the time I was in this days where I wasn't actually present. It's really unfortunate because I've met some great people during that period of my life who know me as that person.
mhm,
And I'll never get you never get a chance to make a second first impression. So of course there are ways to represent yourself. But it's tough. That's one thing that you kind of have to make peace with, is some people meet you when you're at your lowest, and there's not a lot you can do about that, you know?
mhm. Well, I think certainly a lot, what what you've been up to the last few years has just been so transformative, and we'll get into a lot of that. So, can we talk about the suicide attempt?
I never discuss any actual attempts, but
Okay.
I can say what I wanted.
Yes.
And that was just a lot of people. It's kind of sad the way that suicide is presented in media. A lot of times in movies, you'll see someone who's just like trying to get back at the world, and they're like, "Oh, I'll show everybody, I'll make them sorry." And for me, it really wasn't that. And for a lot of people I've met through peer support, it hasn't been that either. For me, it was just about wanting rest. I
Yeah.
was so tired.
Mm-hmm.
I had been, if every waking moment is like fighting against hallucinations and
Mm.
unwanted repetitive thoughts and carrying out compulsive behaviors that you don't want to carry out and being reminded of past trauma, like
Mm-hmm.
I was doing so much work every day just to be several rungs below what like a normally functioning adult would be.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just exhausted. I just
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to. The way I describe it is fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't anger necessarily. um there was a depression component to it because I didn't think that things would get better. Like if people said, in a couple years you'll start making progress, or I didn't want to hear it because I was like, well, right now all I feel is pain, and I sure as heck don't want to continue feeling the pain. It was difficult for me to imagine a version of my future that wasn't as dark,
Mm-hmm.
which is why doing the stuff that I get to do today is just mind melting. I would never ever expect. I used to wear a t-shirt that said negative mental attitude on it. And I felt so cool and so tough. And I was like, screw the world. And now I have PMA, positive mental attitude, tattooed on my whole torso, like huge.
Mm-hmm.
And it's crazy to see the juxtaposition between who I am today and who I was. I never expected myself to get healthier.
Let's talk about that leap from where things were exhausting, just mentally exhausting. You're on the road, you're dealing with OCD, you've got three roommates, you're going to school, you're traveling back from Orlando to Tampa, you've and everything else that's going on. How did you make that leap into, I always say, are you happening to life or is life happening to you? And I love the fact that you just said life was happening to you, because that is one of the statements I say every day, all the time. So, how did you get out of the life is happening to me, and how did you start happening to life?
So for people who haven't listened to my TED Talk, I encourage you to like pause this and go listen to the TED Talk and come back because the context will be really crucial.
Mhm.
The angle of the TED Talk is actually that I never made a leap. It was like I always wanted to make a leap. I wanted there to be like this big like turning point or this moment where I just everything clicks. And all the time people ask me, what was that thing that changed for you? Tell us about that moment.
Mhm.
And there wasn't one. It was like millions of time, like instead of it being a leap, it was like millions of tiny little shuffles of my feet, you know? So
Mhm.
I didn't do any big jump. I did a ton of tiny little shuffles and shifts that really didn't feel special or novel in the moment. It was like, that's kind of the ugly truth of recovery, at least for me, is there wasn't like a magical moment that makes a great story. It was like lots of little moments that make terrible stories. And one that I use as an example a lot is even now to this day, I just turned 29 years old. And to this day, when I put on my deodorant, I put on a different amount of deodorant under my left and right arm. And it bothers me so much. But I do it to challenge my OCD and
Mm.
to tell my OCD, you don't get to make decisions. I make decisions, and I'm making a decision that's going to frustrate you, and you're going to have to live with it. And
Mhm.
I do little stuff like that all the time. And that doesn't make a great story. You're not going to see a movie about the guy who put on a different amount of deodorant under each arm, but it's that in every category of my life for years on end. And honestly, at least from where I'm sitting, in some ways that's easier than having to leap over a building, you know?
I think what you said is what everybody needs to hear. And that's why they say one step at a time, one day at a time, 1 hour at a time, one moment at a time. And I think we sabotage ourselves so often when we think, and I've done this before because I am an addict. So I'm kind of this all or none. And I'm like, I'm going to, lose weight. And so I do all the things. And then I get exhausted by day 5, because I've tried to change
Yep.
my entire life and I'm not ready for it. And we have to ease into these things. And, for some people, I think there is that moment that maybe there's something that happens and they realize, gosh, I need to make this change, or there's something like that. But in order
Mm-hmm.
to really go through the steps, I don't think we should be just jumping off the ledge and building the
Yeah.
parachute as we go down. I think going through step by step. So I think what you said is exactly what everyone needs to hear, because it seems so overwhelming, but little tiny steps all of a sudden get you to where you are today.
Oh yeah. My friends, especially, I've helped a lot of friends get sober, and what we've talked about is I mean, even just take cigarettes, for example. What my friends and I used to talk about is like, well, where do you start? And what I would say is like, when do you usually smoke your first cigarette? And they'd say, I don't know, well, before work, so probably um 8 o'clock in the morning or something. And I would say, okay, when is your first break at work? And they would say 10 o'clock. I'm like, okay, just push back your first cigarette until 10 o'clock. You're pushing back 2 hours. You still get to have your cigarette.
Mm-hmm.
Just push back a little bit. And sometimes it's that first step that my friends have gone, dude, I had my first cigarette at 10 o'clock today. This is my first morning not having one at 8 o'clock since Lord knows when. And
Mm.
it's those little things over time that feel tangible versus me saying, dude, give me that pack of cigarettes and you're never going to smoke one again for your entire life. There are some people who might work that way and that might be helpful for them, but at least what I've seen anecdotally through my friends and what I've experienced through my own recovery is the tiny step feels more like a victory,
Mm.
because you're
Mm-hmm.
like, I went 2 hours, dude. I woke up, and that feeling of elation puts just a little bit of fuel in your tank. And I even feel this when I do my deodorant. I'm like, oh, I just put on the wrong amount of deodorant. Okay, better leave my room. Nice. Now I can't go back in and fix it. And that, a bunch of little moments like that, putting just another drop or two of fuel in your tank it just seems way more practical of a lift.
And it sounds like you celebrate these wins as well. I mean, you are acknowledging the steps as you're going through. You're not just fixated on the final, this is where I want to be, but you are actively patting yourself on the back, or acknowledging your win, or being present in the moment through each one of those steps. Would that sound, is that about right?
So I don't want to misrepresent myself. That's something I have a hard time with, is celebrating the win. Like
Mm.
I can be a very move the goalpost kind of person. So
Mhm.
the moment I accomplish something, I don't say, nice, I accomplished that thing. I
Yeah.
immediately pivot and turn to the next thing that I should be working on. And especially this year and last year, I've been working on allowing myself to recognize
Mm.
a job well done. Like if I clear my inbox, which happens like, I don't know, once every 7 years, I
Mm.
manage to like clear my inbox. And when that happens, now I will think, like, I'll say out loud, and this has helped me a lot. I say, good job, buddy. And I say it like I'm saying it to a friend, and I say it out loud. Because
Mm.
if I don't verbalize it out loud and hear myself say it, I will just fast forward to the next thing.
Mm. It's that positive mental attitude, that PMA.
Hmm.
Yeah, I love it. Let's talk about some of the lyrics in your songs. I was very, and I, this was from watching the interview. I think it was ABC. So you'll have to correct me. So all of your music is centered around mental health. Is that
I would say
the
that
majority of it?
probably 90% or so
Uh-huh.
is related in some way to mental health. But all the lyrics came from my brain, so maybe it's technically 100. but
Yeah. Yeah. And is that, are most people, have you found that the fans are connecting because of how real and raw and honest your lyrics are?
yeah, my old band was super metaphorical. So I used to be in a band called Dark Sermon, and we used really big words in our lyrics, and it was really beautiful and poetic. And if you're like a poetry person or you love um, fiction or writing or copy or anything like that, I encourage you to go read those lyrics. But they're more challenging for people to connect with because it's like
Mm-hmm.
paints such an ornate picture, whereas prison is very straightforward, very direct. And I think people are kind of relieved when they don't have to do the mental work of picking apart, like, what's he trying to say?
Mm.
Because our lyrics are so much more direct, I think it makes it makes that emotional connection much more immediate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw some of the interviews. I think it was from folks in the audience, and it was, I mean, you draw a very broad, powerful crowd, and it brings people emotions. That's very clear. Men, women, doesn't matter what size they are, what race they are. You bring
Mhm.
out a lot of emotions in people. Um, what's some of the feedback that you hear from your fans?
It's a lot of stuff that you wouldn't expect to hear at a metal show.
Mm.
Like um we've had lost, like, estranged siblings reconnect
Hmm.
over our lyrics, and you're like, what, like over a metal band's lyrics? But they're like, yeah, I just heard this song and realized that I've just been holding on to resentment for my brother and I just need to let it
Mm.
go, and I reached out to him, and then we got together and we had a conversation, and I showed him the song and he understood what I was talking about, and it was like this huge closure. And people we've had people, in fact, we have a record called Still Alive, and it's named after a fan that got Still Alive tattooed on him after he saw us play and decided that he would never make another attempt on his own life. So he got the tattoo, and then we named our entire album, our entire next album, after him. It's like way more heartwarming. Like in my old band, people would be like, good show, and
Yeah.
that's awesome in its own
Yeah.
right. But at a prison show, people are like, now I love my mom. Like,
Oh
I'm
my,
getting
like I
sober
have
because of this.
goosebumps like all over.
It's
Like,
different. Like prison
yeah.
fans, we've heard that two people wearing prison t-shirts at some other concert will like find each other and hug each other and just become friends and like listen to each other because they're like, oh, if you like prison, you're
Mm.
open and vulnerable and real and you're willing to have this conversation. I'm just like, what? It's like a totally different culture.
Wow, that's powerful. So it's, so two different bands. So when things were darker in your life is when you were with your previous band. And so is
Mhm.
the new band, do you all, I mean, align on, being open, or is this more of you and they're playing the music? Is this a collaborative? Everybody has that open and honest and raw and talking about mental health, and everyone's comfortable with that.
We're one of the, I guess, like deal breakers for us when we were looking for members was like, we need to find people who believe in what we're
Yeah.
writing about. That's going to
Yeah.
be crucial. So right now you could walk up to any member of prison at a concert and have a conversation with them about what you're going through,
Yeah.
and we'll like listen and hug you and support you, and like everyone's on board. And that's hard to find. Like we might not be able to fix it, and in fact we probably won't
Mm-hmm.
fix anything, but we will be there and
Mm.
hug you and wish you well. And we're very straight up about that. Like, it's not, look at us. We're not doctors, right? We're just people talking about what we're going through. And if our music helps you, we want to hear from you. It's so much more human. It's not like, the band is up here and then you're down there. You're the fan and we're the band. We're the artist that's on the
Mm.
stage. Like we invite people up on the stage every show.
Mm.
Before our last song, we're like, raise your hand if you've never done a stage dive. 30 people raise their hand. We're like, all 30 of you get up on the stage right now.
Hmm.
And we just invite, I mean, obviously we can't do it right now because of COVID and everything. But before, we would just invite tons of people on stage and just help them feel like they're a part of it. And
Mm.
every member of our band has that mentality.
Wow. It's a community. It feels like a community
Hmm.
of folks. Wow. It's a tribe. I mean, and we're all looking for our tribe. Where do we fit? Where are the people that are going to understand us that we can relate to? And
Yep.
now, is it also true there's no cursing? It's Christian lyrics. Is that accurate?
So I am a Christian,
Uh-huh.
and we do have a couple songs regarding faith. The band itself is secular, I guess.
Okay.
We're not like a Christian themed
Hmm.
band.
Hmm.
But no, we don't curse. I've never written a curse word into any song I've ever written. It
Yeah.
just seems like a poor choice of words, in my opinion.
Yeah. How does that does have you heard any feedback from fans about that, or does that surprise
Yeah, they're really confused. A lot of people like hear me screaming and then assume that I'm cursing. I'm like,
Yeah.
no, I don't say curse words in my private life either. I say stuff like golly. I literally say golly almost every day.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. You're gonna start a whole new repertoire for people. You're gonna be impacting them on on more than one level. So how has COVID impacted, I don't know, the fans that you interact with? Have you seen changes over this last year in terms of mental health?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, we haven't been touring, so we've only played one concert since all
Mhm.
this stuff, and it was right when everyone thought that things were getting better. We had a concert right then, and then everything started getting
Mm,
wacky and sticky. So we haven't played any shows since then. But I think a lot of metal fans can isolate just by nature of like a lot of metal fans feel different and
mm,
isolated already. And then when you say like, hey, you know, the one place that you go where you feel like you're not a total freak of nature, and like everybody has face tattoos or everybody has piercings or dyed hair, or everybody wears, you know, these pants that you wear that people make fun of you for wearing or whatever. It's like a place where you can go and just be a total weirdo and everybody just accepts you immediately.
mhm,
So if you say to those people, hey, you could just stay home
mm,
because concerts aren't a thing, it kind of removes one of the only places where um, metal fans feel welcomed and like
right.
they belong. So we've done our best to maintain engagement online, but really it's not the same.
Yeah. Yeah, wow. And hopefully the world will be opening up here soon enough. But absolutely incredible. So you also have CopeNotes. Talk about CopeNotes and what that's all about. I was researching some today, and it was much more than I even anticipated it was. So I'm curious to myself to hear what CopeNotes is all about.
Yeah. So the shortest, simplest way to describe it is CopeNotes provides daily mental health support via text message.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're the kind of person who thinks that you'd benefit from like randomly timed mental health check-ins, like psychology facts and journaling prompts and exercises, just something to interrupt negative thought patterns and train your brain to think in healthier patterns over
Mm-hmm.
time. Cope Notes is like the best set it and forget it anonymous mental health tool where you don't have to like consciously think like, oh, I need to download Cope Notes. It's not an app, or I need to log into Cope Notes, which you don't even have passwords. It's all via text. If you're the kind of person who wants to improve your mental and emotional health, but you don't know where to start,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't always really want to do it, you don't always feel like engaging with mental health support, but you know it would benefit you, Cope Notes is the perfect place to start.
So where did this idea come from? How did all that originate?
So the again, the long version is in my TED talk. So if you didn't pause before, pause now and go watch that because that's kind of the origin story. But Cope Notes came from me needing support and not having consistency anywhere. Like I was going to therapy, for example. So I go to therapy, and then for 6 days and 23 hours, I wasn't in therapy.
Mm,
I was like out in the world and I was like backsliding between sessions. So I was like, man, I wish there was something that would just be, instead of like 1 pound of green beans once a week, I wish I could just eat a couple green beans every night for dinner.
Mm,
Like, I don't want it to be this huge lift every once in a while. I'd rather it be more incremental.
mm-hmm,
So I created CopeNotes because I couldn't find anything like it.
mm. Wow. So how do people get plugged into that? Is it through your website?
Yeah, you can just go to copenotes.com and type in your phone number. Or if you're listening, which I hope you're not listening to this and thinking this, but you probably are, you're thinking, well, I don't need Cope Notes, but it would be great for my friend or my family member. No, it would be good for you. But if a friend or family member came to mind, we do have gift subscriptions as well.
I love that. I love that. One of my big kicks, I'll just go off on this for about 60 seconds, but we have the holy trinity of health, right? Mind, body, soul. And we talk about physical health and we talk about, our spiritual health, and those are not, taboo topics. But as soon as we get to the mind, for whatever reason, we're like, not me, I don't need it. Every single one of us has mental health. Every single one of us needs to be keeping up with our mental health as we do our physical health. There's no difference. And so,
Yeah.
I agree. Everybody, doesn't matter what state you're at, whether you think you have challenges or not, we need to consistently be challenging our minds. So I would encourage, everyone to, whether you want to get it for a friend or for yourself, I think everyone needs it. I think coaching. Now, do you have a coach?
Do I personally have a life coach?
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
Okay.
I'm fortunate to have, I've been volunteering in the mental health space for like a long time, like since high
Uh-huh.
school. So, I have met a lot of people who are like mentors and
Right.
advisors to me.
Yep.
So I am a huge fan of reaching out. I don't have like a traditional coach, but I have like
But you have a
a
mentor, and that's
Rolodex of people that I'm like,
yeah.
oh, I'm facing this thing. I know
Yep.
just who to ask.
Yep.
And
Yep.
and that has saved my butt more times than I can count.
And that's where I was going with that. I think, and whatever that looks like for you, whether it be, a trusted friend or, and someone who's gone through the work, someone that can relate on a certain level, but a mentor, a life coach, whether, whatever that may be, just having that extra level of support for anybody at any time in their life, I think is so incredibly critical. So that's incredible. So what else? So you've got, I want to talk about this Forbes article that came out. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so this has been a weird year with Forbes. This is our third feature in Forbes in a year, which I posted a thing on LinkedIn a while ago about how I used to email them asking them to cover us, and I just couldn't get any coverage. And then in January, they did their first story on Cope Notes, and they called Cope Notes the future of digital mental health,
Mm,
which is really a big honor.
it is.
And then maybe about 6 months later, they talked about us in an article around social entrepreneurship and using a business to create positive social impact and social change. And then just recently, this feels cool to say, I haven't said it out loud, I don't think, but I was just named in their Forbes 1000 list. So kind of like the next up for young entrepreneurs. And it was a really cool, maybe the last year I can get away with calling myself a young entrepreneur because I'm 29, but it was a really cool moment. And I sent the photo and article to my mom. She was pumped.
Now, do you still keep in contact? I bet your mom is so proud. Yes, absolutely. Do you still keep in contact with your counselor when you were a kid?
So interesting. So I have pretty serious memory loss from medication, and I had a brain injury and stuff. Um, so I don't remember like any of the clinicians I have seen. And I'm I asked my mom, and she doesn't have the paperwork
Mm,
from all of it. So like I want so badly to find, I wish I could find like a list of every clinician I met with and just send them an email, like an apology email, like, hey, sorry, I probably made you super frustrated. And then like, here's the fruit of your labor. Like Cope Notes has something like 21,000 users in 94 countries
Wow.
around the world. And I want to like credit them. Like, if you guys weren't patient enough with me, if you guys didn't let me sit in your office, even for half a session, and
Mhm.
complain, like, who knows
Yeah.
whether or not CopeNotes would exist today.
Yeah. And they're going to hear about you and they'll know, and maybe they'll be reaching out and that'll be an incredible
That would
moment
be
for you.
so, I can't wait for that email. Like, hey,
Yeah.
Johnny, remember when you threw a trash can in my office or something?
And now here you are impacting lives in 94 countries. I mean, that's amazing. That's unbelievable. So, what does the future have in store for Cope Notes, prison, Johnny, all of the above? What you got going on?
Well, prison is, I mean, God willing, we're going to be able to tour next year, depending on how everything clears up with COVID. But we are announcing a new single here shortly. So, depending on when you're listening to this, it might already be out. It's called Reality. It is one of my favorite songs we've ever written. So, look it up on Spotify or Apple Music or wherever you find your music. Let's see. Cope Notes, we're doing a lot more B2B stuff
Mm,
lately. So we're like partnering with treatment centers and universities and school districts and businesses and insurance companies to get Cope Notes into the hands of like really large groups of people.
mhm,
So that's kind of more of our focus moving forward. Is we're doing a lot of like community engagement rather than trying to connect with individual people all the time. We're kind
mhm,
of dividing our efforts. So some of our efforts go to connecting with individuals, and some are going to those community groups that can get Cope Notes into the hands of way more people than we ever could. And I'm also doing much more public speaking, which is fun. I used to do it so much before COVID, and then I hadn't really been doing it much. And then this year I started doing some virtual stuff, and then now I'm starting to fly out and do conferences again. So I'm really looking forward to speaking more. So if you are looking for a keynote speaker, please hit me up.
That's fantastic. So, how do people find you?
If you're looking for Cope Notes stuff, go to copenotes.com. It has all of our links. We're on social media. Um, And if you want more information about me as a speaker or for like consulting or training or anything, it's literally johnnycrowder.com. So it's easy to remember. And then I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn. I don't believe in Twitter. And then I'm on Instagram at Johnny Crowder Loves You.
Love it. I love it. So, everybody who's listening, make sure you go out. And I know it helps with the algorithms when you get likes and subscribes and all of that. So, go support prison, go support Johnny, check out Cope Notes. There's so many resources. Johnny, you really are such an inspiration. And I hope that all of your counselors that you've ever encountered do come across your name, whether that be in Forbes, in this interview, on ABC, just hearing about your band, wherever it is, you are out there in full force and they're going to come across it. And I cannot wait for them to reach out to you and just let you know how much they've impacted your life. You are kind of a poster child for success of coming from one end and just baby steps to where you are today. So tons of hope and courage and strength, and I love everything about your story. So thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate you, and everyone will make sure to put all the information in the article as well. But thank you again, Johnny. We appreciate your time. And again, this is Jen Sugermeyer with Recovery Today magazine, bringing you stories of strength and hope. We'll see you next month. Have a good one.